Elliot Bewick. I'm 19 years old and I've been working in the media space for the last 4 or 5 years now. I started very early on, and not to get too deep too early on, but I've always sort of had this aspiration to maximize my potential and do as much with the life I've been given as possible. So I got into the media world straight away. I was doing freelance videography. I ended up producing a massive podcast called Triggernomotry that you should totally check out as well after this.
No way.
Was working with them from 300,000 subscribers until 1 million. And from there, those 3 years were super formative in my life. I always tell people I went to the University of Trig instead of actual university, and I ended up learning a lot more and coming out with a lot less debt. So it was super formative for my outlook on the world and also my perception of myself. And as of about a month and a half ago now, nearly 2 months, I went freelance to pursue my own podcast, and
As you should.
created the next generation.
So I'm going to go in the first question because, as I said earlier, I was watching the Ruby Loader podcast. Brilliant. Thought you were exceptionally impressive. And you said when masculinity is outlawed, only the outlaws seem masculine. Or you said something along those lines. How did you come up with that? And what does that mean? Or where did you hear it?
So that's actually lifted from Andrew Claven, who speaks about this. And just like your reaction to seeing that, I had the exact same reaction hearing him say that on a podcast. It summarized everything that I've been thinking and the trends that I've seen developing over the last few years. I know, especially since lockdown, I think that quote's become more and more relevant. And essentially, it says what it's on the tin. If you break it down, masculinity in the last few years has been outlawed, in my opinion, in the true sense of what masculinity actually is. And it's been replaced with all this pseudo masculinity of what a man should be in the modern era. And it's, as a result, it's caused all these outlaws pretending to be masculine, playing the masculine role. People like Andrew Tate, who I despise, and I think he's done a lot of damage for society. We can get into that if you want. And other streamers like Sneeko, just playing off this void that does need to be filled in terms of people lacking father figures. You see kids in London, once they reach the age of 15, they have a 50% chance of having parents that are still together. And usually when you see single parent homes, it's always the mother in charge. So there's a real lack of father figures, any proper role models to actually shape your life after, that aren't just preaching to and drive Bugattis, which I don't think is the right recipe for a truly fulfilled life. So I would say that people like Andrew Tate are more of a symptom rather than a cause of the problems that we're facing today. And what I mean by that is he's a result of all these campaigners and activists having this thirst for hunting down toxic masculinity, which I don't think is actually a real thing. And, as a result, they've caused a lot of these issues that we are facing, and these bad role models that have absolutely blown up on the internet in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely the case that when you endeavor to suppress men, you will only end up suppressing the men that in reality didn't really need suppressing, because the ones that are belligerent and can give a look about what you have to say will still exist. And if anything, you'll encourage them and you'll magnify their existence, because all the others will disappear, because there'll be the considerate men and the considerate boys, I guess, will be, okay, well, how should I act? How do I behave? What do I do? And the ones that don't care will just do what they want to do, and they'll just go. We definitely saw that with Andrew Tate, and you bring up people like Sneeko. I forgot about Sneeko, but you've also got the podcasters, so the Fresh and Fit, the whatever podcast, who sell a certain narrative that for whatever reason is very popular, and part of it is because it gives men that have a resentment towards, so when we move into the dating scene, that have a resentment towards women, it gives them an opportunity to watch what's going on and sort of give you they straw man that argue. They exaggerate the argument, so they bring in a specific cohort of women who are not an accurate representation. So they immediately distort the landscape, and then they obviously they're intelligent and they know what they're doing, so they wrap them up in their words and they make them look sort of stupid. And then it's for men to look at it and go, aha, da da da, I'm right, I'm justified, da da da, I feel vindicated, etc., etc. So it's really interesting. What was it like working for Triggernomotry? Because that's mad. That's what's he called? I really there's two of them.
Constantine Kissen and Francis Foster.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. The kin. Is it not Constantine, the Russian guy, or is he?
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah. He's I really like him. He's very direct with the way he talks, and for someone who's trying to improve their directness, then that's I really enjoy his work. So why did you decide to branch out and do your own podcast? What is it you want to achieve from the next generation? Is it particularly young men? Because I mean, 19, that's nuts. I mean, I was thinking about earlier what I was like when I was 19, and I had ideas like I do now, but I mean, I should have started this podcast when I was 19. Imagine where we've been now. But I didn't really have I didn't have enough to say. It wasn't there. So you said on the Ruby Lola that you had this sort of, the Ruby Lola, the podcast with her, that you had this desire in you you said along something lines of you had written down when you were like 12 exactly what it was that you wanted to do. Where do you think that came from?
That's such a good question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot this year. I moved out when I was 18 last November, nearly a year ago. And since moving out, it's given me that space and time alone, because I don't have many friends that live in London, because obviously most of them can't afford it. And I'm fortunate enough that I had a job to pay for that. So it's given me that space to be alone a fair bit and reflect on things like this and on myself. And I think, honestly, a lot of it does just come down to an innate desire to fulfill my potential that's always been there. And that might not be what a lot of people want to hear, but it wasn't this thing magically gifted to me by someone giving me advice or a mentor. It has been there. I remember when I was 13, I used to do this thing where I evaluated everything I had access to and how I could make use out of that to be the best version of myself. And that's why I got into actually the fitness world before anything else. Was I saw that I didn't have any money. I couldn't drive, obviously, because I was 13. And I saw that I had my body. I had access to doing sit-ups, doing the plank, going on runs. So that's what I went for first. And I think through that, I learned a lot about the science of the body and how that transfers over into everything else. But to actually answer your question, I don't know. I just, in that moment in time, I was so grateful for the life I'd been given, how I'd been raised, that I just had this thought that I need to make the most of it. And a lot of people fall into the trap of trying to make out that their upbringing's difficult. And this probably stems a little bit actually from this romanticization of growing up tough and what sells online. Because me coming on here and saying, I love my parents, even though they're not together, they've both been there in my life. They've been great role models for me. I grew up in Brighton, which is a lovely place.
Hove.
That doesn't sell the success story. Hove, actually. It doesn't sell as well as someone saying I came from a broken council estate.
Yeah.
Or if they did come from Hove as well, or a middle class area, they have to put something into their lives that seems like a struggle that they overcame, like having depression or anxiety. So I think people need to be careful, and they need to be as grateful as possible for everything they have going on in their lives, and actually use that as fuel to raise the bar even more of what they should achieve.
Yeah. No, you do give off that impression of someone who was just driven. It's obviously just like a biological it was just in you. The fact that you didn't go through some, like, one of the questions I always ask people at the end of the podcast is, do you have what was your breaking point? Because that's why it's just called the Breaking Point podcast. I'm interested in the lowest points, and I'm always, or the highest points, because actually a lot of people, they find the biggest revelations of their life and existence can also come from the peaks as well as the troughs. But I do agree, we have romanticized and fantasized this idea of going through a struggle and the sort of the wounded individual, the wounded psyche that needs something that to sort of galvanize it. And this is yes, it's a bit of an offshoot, but there was something, I don't know where it came up. I just wanted to talk to you about it, but this is really random. But we're talking about, when you talk about like friendships and relationships and why this generation, I was thinking of why this generation are potentially struggling on those fronts. And I've watched Jordan Peterson, who I bring up nearly every pod. No, actually, no, I bring him up less and less, but I referenced him without referencing him. And he was talking about that this guy discovered, was it France de Walt or something? Someone discovered the play circuit in mammals, which exists. I'm not sure what part of the brain it exists in. I think it's probably a multitude. But he was saying that in order for play to take place, all other aspects of like our existence need to be satiated. And I think part of the reason, and stabilized, and I think part of the reason why people are struggling to build relationships, romantic and platonic, is because we don't exist in a society that creates a hospitable environment so that we can feel satiated across all our, we're dysregulated, and therefore play, because effectively play is a form of abstraction. Making friends with people is quite all other, what am I trying to say? It sits at, it's like at the top of the pyramid of sort of our existence. We need all other things to be in place before we feel in a place, to be in place before we feel in space where we can create the dynamic between someone and build relationships. And I wonder if maybe that's why people are struggling, because social media is dysregulating them and all sorts of things are going on, and therefore dating is hard. You said you grew up as you're an only child, aren't you?
Yes.
I got it right here. How was your teenagehood? I mean, you're still a teenager, mate. But how was your sort of, how did you, because you know, when COVID happened, you must have been what, like 14 or 15 or something?
Yes, I was 15.
15, yeah. So what's your opinion on this younger generation? What's sort of going on? Because I'm slightly out of it now to some degree, but you're still right in the thick of it.
Well, to lead back to what you were talking about earlier, and I won't give the game away by answering your final question now on what was my breaking point, but to give a clue, it was self-imposed, because I grew up with a nice circumstance in terms of my family and not having to worry when the next meal will be put on the table. And I think that's the issue, is that ironically, people are self-imposing struggle on themselves, but it's struggle that abdicates any responsibility, rather than self-imposing struggle in the sense of challenges that boost their responsibility. And I think that's what lies at the heart of the issue. You talk about that pyramid. I don't know if it links directly into Maslow's sort of hierarchy of needs, but with play being at the top.
Reference.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that. I think play is at the top. And when you put these obstacles in your own way before that, as I've said, abdicate responsibility from yourself, you're never going to reach that state of play. And that's fueled further by people espousing all these different messages on social media. I mean, something I've been thinking about a lot this week is this idea that no one's coming to save you. And that's been really popular as this David Goggins message to counter people giving themselves self-diagnosed anxiety or ADHD. But I just think that with the technology available and the incentives at play, having a more nuanced message doesn't necessarily lend itself to selling. So on one side, you've got what I've diagnosed in society as people self-imposing struggles that abdicate responsibility of anything. But then on the other side, you've got people taking too much responsibility, especially in the manosphere. Do you think all the incels that are rising in numbers constantly need to hear that no one is coming to save you? That's the last thing they need to hear. And I think it ties into this loss of community and connection with other people. There's obviously a grain of truth in that you do need to sort your out. And I think the sad thing is that you do need to be able to show and demonstrate to people some form of capability for them to be willing to reach out and save you. But to just say that no one's coming to save you ever is completely wrong, in my opinion. And the most beautiful things I've experienced in my life, whether it's this fun at the top of the pyramid, or if it's help from older mentors to get me to that place of being able to have fun, it's because of other people coming and not necessarily saving me, but helping me and guiding me in the right direction, just like producing Triggernomotry. That was a huge life-changing job for me. It was 3 years where I got to meet the most incredible people and work with the most incredible people,
Wow.
all much older than myself. And they didn't need to give me that job. They didn't need to keep on giving me job changes and promoting me. But they had faith in me when they first brought me on. And that faith in many ways was them saving me from maybe, I mean, I would have never gone to university, but if I was someone else, them giving me that would have made me avoid going to university and following the crowd like many people do.
Yeah. I think you bring up it's a really, really good point, the idea of no one's coming to save you. I think something like that, and as you said, that sells more than a more nuanced approach. That fits into the category of, so the sort of the Buddhist idea is that life is suffering, and that's an incredibly exaggerated and void of the nuances of life. It's just a statement, short statement, life is suffering, get on with it. And the idea of something like that, I think, is to act as like an undergird so that you fall back on that. And I think it's the same sentiment with that idea of no one's coming to save you. If you can contend with that truth, or not truth, contend with that possibility, then you're configuring yourself in a way that means that you may feel, or may be more capable to contend in a world where it is pretty cutthroat, and it is ruthless. So yeah, what do you think that maybe is possibly something to do with this idea that it's a short pocketed statement that grabs your attention, but it takes like a nuanced brain to look at it and go, okay, well, maybe that's not true in its entirety, but there's a sentiment there that is trying to help me empower me. I hate that word, empower, but encourage me to build myself up so that it's basically saying, don't walk around in the dark because you might bump into something, but it's not always going to be dark. It's not saying that. That's really bad. I try to come up with a pithy little comment. I can't come up with them. But yeah, I'm going to get onto this list because I want to get through some of this stuff.
Yeah, no, I take that pushback though, and just to address that quickly, I think that you're right to bring that up, and I wouldn't necessarily even blame David Goggins for that lack of nuance. I talk about how we're living now in the death of nuance, and that's simply because of the way that the message is distributed. You know, the medium is the message, and when you have all these short TikToks with inspirational music playing in the background of Goggins just saying that first part, and I'm sure, you know, I mean, take me as an example, I don't actually know what he says after that because I haven't delved into the full podcast. Maybe he does say, but actually you need to build community as well and friends. So it's not necessarily his fault, but I just think that right now it's not necessarily what we need to model our lives on. And a lot of people are just modeling their lives on that. No one is coming to save you go monk mode, go MGTOW, men go their own way, and they're retreating into these isolated communities online where, ironically, you're ostracized for getting out of them. You see things like incel forums and MGTOW. When people mention any inkling of success with a girl or branching away from this online community of complaining about the rest of the world and not just focusing on yourself, which I think is very selfish, they get absolutely hammered down and they get kicked out of the group, and then they're literally left for dead. So yeah, I take your pushback, and I think it's definitely valid. And there's obviously impact with these short slogans. You can't add a nuance to everything when you're communicating it to mass audiences necessarily straight away in like a hashtag. But I don't know that that approach is the right approach at the moment, because we see people drifting further and further away from society at the moment.
Yeah, and also it's a humanitarian community-based outlook, which fundamentally is not a good way of being if you want to exist in a sort of conducive way to positive mental health. So let's move on to a little bit of modern dating, because I think that's really interesting, and you talk about that a lot. So I think you talk about lots of things a lot, but it's something that I wanted to explore. So there's this thing called Briffault's law. Did you see it on the thing that I sent you? Did you Google it?
I did indeed.
Did you know about it before?
I'm aware. Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know what Briffault's law is, it's basically the idea that a relationship doesn't occur unless there is a clear and obvious benefit for the female. And I look at something like that and I think that's a very, very interesting, I think, and logical point of view. And I think one of the guy who's the Constantine guy or something, the guy of Triggernomotry, the other guy,
Yes.
What's his name? I need to remember his name. What's his name?
Konstantin Kisin, yeah.
Oh, it's Constantine. Okay, cool. So Constantine, I watched a little clip, and it was Stephen Bartlett, which, meh. How can men, along one of those videos, he does loads of them, and it was with Constantine, and he said the number one thing men can do to improve their position is improve themselves. And I think that's absolutely the case. Any man out there that's struggling, all they can really do is work on who they are and build aspects of themselves, because society is where it is, and I'm going to very sort of cliche stereotypical point, but just to premise the point, we've balanced the world, I suppose, to some degree, and as a result, that has meant that it's harder to as a man, it's harder to raise your status, because you're now no longer just competing with other men, you're competing with women. And therefore, that means that you have a greater pool of discrepancy from where you are to where you could be, and women, the hypergamy and things like that. And I've lost my train of thought from what my original question was going to ask you. When you did that live video, well, not live video, the what do you call it?
Public interviews.
Yeah, public interviews. What was your takeaway from doing that?
Well, I guess firstly, just to pick up on that point of Briffault's law, it's fascinating, and it's very closely linked to this idea of hypergamy, which is that women always marry up or get in relationship with men that have this higher status in society than them relative to the current culture, whatever higher status means. And I think that there's pretty conclusive evidence on that is the case generally. And obviously you have to always preface this with like, generally, it's not 100% of the time.